All right, let's talk about the popes. Specifically, the ones who make the phrase holier than thou sound like a cruel joke. Because while the Catholic Church has had its share of inspiring leaders, it's also had some real doozies. So, buckle up your cassocks and let's dive into the top 10 worst popes in history. Kicking off our list is Pope Alexander VI, the patriarch of the infamous Borgia family. We're talking about a man who treated the papacy like his own personal piggy bank, selling off church offices to the highest bidders. And his personal life, let's just say the man had a lot of close friends, many of whom were suspiciously young and attractive. Alexander VI was like the papal equivalent of a reality TV show, scandalous, outrageous, and you couldn't look away even if you tried. He even appointed his teenage son Cesare as a cardinal, proving that nepotism knows no bounds. So yeah, Alexander VI, the original gangster pope, setting the bar low for papal misbehavior since 1492. Next up is Pope Benedict XIX, a man who makes you wonder if they were handing out papal tiaras at a medieval gas station. His story is one of the most bizarre and chaotic in the history of the papacy. This guy was elected pope not once, not twice, but 3 times. Yes, you heard that right, 3 times. It's almost as if he had a frequent flyer card for the papal throne. Benedict XIX became pope when he was just a wee lad of, get this, 12 years old. Imagine a preteen running the church. It's like putting a kid in charge of a candy store. Unsurprisingly, his reign was about as stable as a Jenga tower built by a hyperactive ferret. The church was in constant turmoil, and his leadership was anything but steady. He was accused of all sorts of naughty behavior, from simony to, well, let's just say his personal life wouldn't have earned him a Man of God award. His actions were scandalous enough to make even the most lenient of medieval clerics blush. Eventually, even the medieval church had enough, and they basically told Benedict to take a hike. His behavior was too much for even the most tolerant of his contemporaries. He got the hint, sold the papacy, and rode off into the sunset, only to come crawling back twice more. Each time his return was met with more chaos and controversy, making his tenure one of the most tumultuous in papal history. Now let's talk about Pope Boniface VIII, a man who really knew how to hold a grudge. Boniface was a big fan of papal power, believing the Pope was basically God's right-hand man, here to boss around kings and emperors. One of those rulers was Philip IV of France, who wasn't too keen on taking orders from a guy who wore a funny hat. Their feud escalated into a full-blown showdown, with Philip eventually sending his goons to rough up the Pope. But the real kicker? Boniface's nemesis wasn't just some earthly king, it was Dante, who in his epic poem, Inferno, decided to give Boniface a special shout-out by reserving him a cozy spot in the 8th circle of hell. Now that's what we call holding a grudge. Coming in hot on our list of papal mishaps is Pope Urban VI, the man who accidentally invented the church equivalent of a messy divorce. Urban was elected during a time of great turmoil in the church, and he decided the best way to fix things was to be a real hard-ass. We're talking public humiliations of cardinals, threats of violence, the whole 9 yards. Unsurprisingly, this didn't exactly endear him to, well, anyone. The cardinals, fearing for their sanity and possibly their lives, declared Urban's election invalid and chose another pope. And boom, just like that, the Western Schism was born, with 2 popes excommunicating each other and Europe picking sides. Let's talk about Pope John XII, the bad boy of the papacy, a man whose life could have been ripped straight from the pages of a salacious tabloid. His story is one of excess, scandal, and a blatant disregard for the sanctity of his position. John XIII ascended to the throne of St. Peter at the ripe old age of 18, a mere teenager thrust into one of the most powerful positions in the world. But instead of using his position for good, old Johnny decided to treat the papal palace like his own personal pleasure dome. He transformed the sacred halls into a playground for his indulgences. We're talking wild parties that lasted for days, mistresses galore, and enough debauchery to give a Roman emperor pause. The papal palace became infamous for its hedonistic revelries. Rumors swirled about his scandalous liaisons, his fondness for gambling, and his general lack of piety. It was said that he gambled away church treasures and indulged in every vice imaginable. But John's wild ride came to a screeching halt when he was allegedly caught in bed with another man's wife. This scandal was the final straw for many. Let's just say John XIII's papacy ended not with a bang but with a whimper and possibly a few bruises. His reign is remembered as one of the most controversial and tumultuous in the history of the papacy. Pope Leo IX, the Medici Pope, a man who loved art, luxury and maybe just a little bit too much extravagance. Leo XVI was a patron of the arts, commissioning masterpieces like Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. But all that beauty came at a cost. To fund his lavish lifestyle and artistic endeavors, Leo X went a little overboard with the whole selling indulgences thing. Indulgences were basically get out of jail free cards for sin, but Leo X took it to a whole new level, peddling indulgences like they were going out of style. This rubbed one particular monk named Martin Luther the wrong way, and well, the rest, as they say, is history. Hold on to your holy water, folks, because it's about to get weird, really weird. Enter Pope Stephen VI, the man who decided to hold a posthumous trial for his dead predecessor, Pope Formosus. Yes, you heard that right, a trial for a corpse. This wasn't just a casual let's dig up the body and ask it some questions kind of deal. No, this was something far more elaborate and bizarre. This was a full-blown ecclesiastical court case, complete with lawyers, witnesses, and the rotting corpse of Formosus propped up on a throne. Imagine the scene, a decaying body dressed in papal robes sitting in judgment. Stephen VI accused Formosus of perjury, violating canon law, and basically being a very bad pope. The charges were serious, but the circumstances were downright surreal. The trial was a complete sham, with Stephen VI acting as judge, jury, and executioner. It was clear from the start that the outcome was predetermined. The corpse was stripped of its papal vestments, its fingers chopped off, and then tossed in the Tiber River. This was meant to be a final act of humiliation. The whole corpse trial thing backfired spectacularly on Stephen VI. The people were outraged by the grotesque spectacle, and he ended up strangled by his own people a few months later. It was a grim end to a grim episode in papal history. This bizarre chapter serves as a reminder of the lengths to which power struggles can go, even within the sacred walls of the Vatican. The Cadaver Synod, as it came to be known, remains one of the most infamous events in the history of the papacy. Next on our list is Pope Paul IV, a man who took religious intolerance to a whole new level. Paul IV was a staunch believer in the whole US versus them mentality, particularly when it came to the Jewish community. In 1555, he issued a papal bull called Cum Nimis Absurdum, which basically translated to being Jewish is really inconvenient for us. This document revoked Jewish rights, forced them to wear distinctive clothing, and confined them to a walled-off section of Rome known as the ghetto. The Roman ghetto, created under Paul IV's watchful eye, became a symbol of religious persecution and segregation for centuries. Paul IV's actions cast a long shadow on history, and his legacy remains a stain on the papacy. Now let's delve into the world of papal intrigue and possible homicide with Pope Sergius III. Historical records from this era are about as clear as a mud puddle, but let's just say that Sergius III's rise to power was shrouded in more than a little bit of controversy. Before Sergius III donned the papal tiara, there was this whole messy business involving his predecessor Pope Leo V and a rather ambitious cleric named Christopher. Sergius III, after a brief stint as Pope himself, was then invited back to the position after Christopher suffered a similar fate. We'll probably never know for sure, but the whispers of murder and intrigue continue to follow Sergius III through history. Now, before you grab your pitchforks and accuse us of besmirching the name of the beloved Pope John XIII, let's be clear, we're talking about a different John XIII. This John XIII, who reigned in the 15th century, was, well, let's just say he wouldn't have won any Pope of the Year awards. This John XIII was elected during the whole Western Schism debacle, a time when having two popes was causing a bit of a theological headache. He was supposed to be the guy who ended the schism, the great unifier of the church. Instead, he turned out to be, well, kind of a disaster. He was accused of simony, corruption, and generally being a bit of a loose cannon. So, there you have it, folks, a whirlwind tour of the papacy's greatest hits, or perhaps more accurately, its greatest flops. From corrupt politicians to power-hungry schemers, these popes remind us that even the most sacred institutions are run by flawed human beings. But hey, at least they make for some interesting history, right?